Good morning, everyone. It's really amazing to see the high energy and the engagement that was there in all of the different booths. Today I'm here to talk to all of you about NCF 2023, understand the policy a little better, and basically think about how do we bring that into action. NCF is a big change, or it marks a big change to school education in our country. It is not an incremental or a small change. It's a fairly transformative change that the government is imagining, and it is with that spirit that they have put out NCF 2023 as a policy document for all of us. And hence, as educators, it is very important that we understand its essence very deeply, and we think about how do we bring it to action or bring it to life in each of our schools. Now, what I have done basically over the last, or actually before that, there's been a lot of popular discourse in media around NCF. We've read news, especially when NCF drafts came out, we read news that, oh, it is talking about Indianness, and it talks about, for example, it says, oh, you have to start teaching in local languages, no longer English, or now board exams will be twice a year, which means will it bring down the level of the board examination? There was a lot of this public discourse around NCF. But actually, if you look at the 600 pages and you read them very deeply, you'll find that there is a lot more that sits inside the NCF policy document. So what I did was, over the last 1.5 years, I've actually not only spent time reading this multiple times, but also I've spent time with people who were on the committee who designed this document, and understood what was the vision, what was the thinking, what was the inspiration behind NCF 2023. And what I've done is I've distilled all of this, all of my learnings, into a few core things that NCF is telling us that we can bring to our schools. And my intent today, Shashi shared earlier that I also run schools, I'm an educator myself. My intent today really is to share with you some of these learnings from NCF and be able to give you some actionable things that you can do in each of your schools and take that back with you. So that's really my intention for the session today. Okay, so let's get started, right? What was this decoding of the key messages that I've done with NCF? See, I think let's first start with the outcome in mind. What NCF says is that for our children to be ready for the future, we cannot focus our school education on them storing knowledge and information. For too long, we have done that. We need to shift the objective of school education from storing knowledge and information in our children to building skills and preparing them for life. So it changes the objective of school education. And NCF has been very vocal and very clear about its intent to make this shift. And hence, that is what it expects from all of us as educators, for us to move from knowledge gathering. We used to say classrooms are places of knowledge gathering. From there, we move to real life skill building. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that NCF, for example, very concretely says that we must move the goalpost, which is our assessments. Typically, assessments are the key goalposts that we're working towards, right? That we must move our assessments from fact-based assessments to understanding and application-based assessments. Often it is called nowadays competency-based assessments. What is competency? Competency is my competence or ability to apply what I've learned, in a different or a new environment. So NCF basically changes the goalpost because it has a vision that we want our children to be ready for the future, ready for life. We don't want to store knowledge in them. They can pick up knowledge themselves. Because it has that vision, the first thing it does is it changes the goalpost for us as educators, and the boards are going to be implementing this change. You all run CBSE or ICSE schools, and you would have heard now from the boards that they're making that shift where the assessments are changing from memory-based questions. The final board exams are changing from memory-based questions to competency-based questions. and every year the proportion of that is increasing. And there will be a time when the whole assessment will only be application. There's going to be no reason to test for memory. That's the future that we are working towards. Now, as educators, we must know that, the boards might take some time to get there. But we need to realize that that's the future that we are preparing our students for. And hence, the way we teach in our classrooms, what we do in our classrooms and what we do in our schools will need to change right away. Everything that we do which encourages or results in them memorizing things is not going to work anymore, because rote learning will set up these children for failure. Eventual success in the board examination will only be application and understanding. Memory is not going to help these children anymore. And I think that's the big goalpost shift that NCF does. So, it comes down to, okay, so what do we do? What do we do about this, right? The first change that we must make in our schools is we must also change the way we do assessments. Now, this we must change for all age groups, for primary, and we must change now. We must not wait till the boards. I often see that schools are waiting that, if the board examination is 20% competence based, so I will now follow and do 20%. I'm saying that the future is pretty much 100% competence based. And if that is the case, let us as educators think about what do we do today. And the first change that I'm suggesting is that we must change the way we do our assessments, and we must also change what we do with that assessment data. We should change this right away so that we're actually preparing our students for this future. So let's take this one at a time. What do I mean by changing the way we do assessments or how we do assessments? We also must make this change, where we must move our assessments from rote or recall based questions to application and understanding based questions. So let's take an example, right, for us to understand this. Today, what do we do? Let's take an example of English. What do we do? Our students study a text in their textbook, and then in the exam, we ask questions from the same text. Yeah, most of us do that. I see some head nods. That actually is memory-based assessment. The true objective of English language learning in school is for them to build the skill to independently use the language in life. And hence, a change in English assessment would mean that the assessment has a new text with the same level of difficulty, the same type of words, but a completely new text that a student reads in the assessment and is able to answer comprehension questions reading that text. So that is a change from rote-based or recall-based questions and assessments to application-based. Now, I know there are a lot of questions that I can see on your faces on how do we get there. I will talk about how we get there, so just hold your breath for that. But at least let us first acknowledge, what does this even mean? What do we mean when we say change from recall and rote-based questions to real application-based questions? So I've taken the example of English. Let's take the example of math or science. Instead of asking them questions that have been taught in the classroom from the textbook, in assessments ask questions that are not the same. They are asking to apply the same understanding but in a different context, with a different example, with a different situation. Then only are we testing for their real understanding. So that's what I first mean about making a change in the way we do assessments. Now, once we redesign our assessments, the question becomes, what do we do with that assessment data? Very often, the way we run our schools is that we teach, we revise, we then assess, and then what do? We move to the next topic, we move to the next chapter, we move to the next term, we move to the next year. That is a linear way of using assessment in schools. What NCF says is that we must move to spiral way of using assessments. Now, what does that mean? That means that we teach, we assess frequently, but then post-assessment, once we have the data, after the assessment, once we have the data, we actually remediate. Every child learns different topics in different speed, in different ways. Sometimes they don't get it the first time and they need some remediation. So we remediate before we move on to the next chapter, to the next unit, even to the next year. That we remediate and take that learning loop forward. Only when they are able to do this, we are actually using assessments for learning and we are able to move our students forward. So NCF asks for a big shift in the way we set the goalpost of assessments, both in terms of how we assess, what we assess, but also in terms of what do we do with it. Now, while changing assessments will help, it's just the beginning, right? Because we are basically saying we're changing the goalpost for our students. But how do we prepare our students to succeed once they get there? I think that is the important question that we need to ask ourselves. And fortunately, NCF gives us a lot of answers on how do we get our students there. How do we get our students to be future ready for these assessments which are now all application based. Okay, so the next section really I will be talking about are things that we can change in our teaching practices, in our classrooms for us to be able to build skills among students and move away from rote learning to real life learning. Okay, let's take the first one. We must move from or transition from textbook based teaching to multimodal teaching. NCF talks about that. So for the longest time, the biggest anchor, the most important thing in any classroom has been a textbook. You know, a classic classroom is teacher with textbook in hand with a chalk and a blackboard. We replaced the blackboard with a whiteboard so that the chalk became a pen. But the anchor still remained the textbook. And NCF says and recognizes that teaching from textbook is not good enough. Let us look at all of us as adults. Do we all have textbooks for life? Do we all learn every day as teachers, as principals, as educators using a textbook? No. We learn through different modes, through different mediums, which is what is multimodal. Now, to do this shift, what it means is that your teachers have to not anchor learning on textbook, but your teachers need to anchor learning on a lesson plan. The teacher needs to make a lesson plan, or you need to make a lesson plan for the teachers, and that lesson plan should not be anchored only on the textbook. It should take the textbook as an important resource, but think about, if I want to teach this topic, what is better? Is a video better? Is an activity better? Is an exploration better? And then I come to the textbook. So the lesson plan will help shift the anchor from textbook-based teaching to multimodal. And when we say multimodal, what do we mean? Multiple modes, right? Use audiovisual, use interactive resources on a screen, use interactive materials on the table, so kinesthetic learning, go out of the classroom, bring things into the classroom. It means all of these things in addition to a textbook. We are not saying take the textbook away. NCF is not saying that, but it is saying let's not make textbook the whole and soul and the only thing that's happening in the classroom. So that's one big shift. In teaching practice, it talks about for us to get to the competency-based assessments, or for us to get our students to succeed in competency-based assessments, right? So that's the first teaching practice change that NCF talks about. Second is that, how should these lesson plans be? A typical classroom is teacher teaching. It's like a lecture hall. I often hear teachers say that I'm going to give a lecture. They are thinking they're doing interactive stuff, but they're saying lecture. And what that means is that basically teacher is teaching, and when she feels that my students are not getting it, she will teach some more, and she will explain more, and then she'll explain in home language, and then she'll explain in many different ways. But she anchors all of that learning process on her talking and on her explaining. However, learning does not happen like that. Imagine if you had to learn how to swim, and the trainer basically sat you down in a classroom and said, I will teach you how to swim, and then kept teaching you and kept explaining, and then one day said, okay, tomorrow is your exam, so let's go for it. I will let you revise before the exam, and throws you into the pool. And of course, you're not able to swim. And then, they say that, well, I explained it to you. Why are you not able to do it? Why are you not able to do it? Because you've never tried it. So learning happens through trying and failing and then moving forward. But what we find so obvious with swimming, and I can take any other sports example, I can take cricket and I can take volleyball, what seems very obvious to us, unfortunately does not seem obvious when we talk about math, sciences, languages and social sciences. But the same thing is true there too. And hence what NCF says is, please move the lesson plan from teacher teaching and explaining and then students doing questions and answers to what is called the gradual release model. Now what happens in a gradual release model? It basically releases responsibility from the teacher to the students. So every class, every period is then broken up into I do, which means as a teacher, I will explain something. So let's say I'm teaching you a new topic, I will explain. Then we do, which means I will now work with you in groups for you to try it on. And you know, my classroom is a safe environment, so try. If you fail, that's okay, I'm there to help you. And then I will let you do this yourself, alone, and I'm still around to help you out. So the gradual release of responsibility model essentially looks something like this, right? That from a teacher's point of view, the beginning of the class is her responsibility, and towards the end of the class, she has given responsibility to the students. Now, this is a very, very well-established practice globally for many years. Many, many years. In fact, when I started my work in education and I started traveling to schools in other parts of the world, what I realized was, you know, those classrooms were so different from the classrooms that we had. And often, the thinking over here in India had become, oh, we must add activities. But activities by themselves are not enough. How do you structure it and how do you move the responsibility from yourself to your students is a very important structure that needs to get followed in the classroom. Okay, so this is the next thing that NCF talks about. So we spoke three things. One says change the goalpost to skill building. Then it said, for you to get your students to that goalpost, move away from textbook to multimodal learning. So move away from textbook to a lesson plan which brings together multimodal learning. And then within that lesson plan, it says move to the gradual release of responsibility model of teaching. Okay, so we've covered three things that NCF talks about. Now let's go to the next one. The next one that it talks about is that for every subject, there is a unique pedagogy that you must use, which is appropriate for learning to happen in that subject. Now, very often, curriculum was understood as content. So, you know, when we speak about curriculum, we would talk about what is the topic coverage, what is the topic we're starting from, what is the topic we're ending at. But curriculum is both content, which is what is going to be taught, and pedagogy, which is how is it taught. Because when these two things are not married closely, good learning does not happen. And NCF actually brings up pedagogy center stage in the policy document where it talks about we need to focus on how do we teach in the classroom for that learning to deepen, for that understanding to deepen. Now, I already spoke about two pedagogies with you. I spoke about moving from textbook to multimodal. Multimodal is a pedagogical approach. I also spoke about gradual release of responsibility. It's a pedagogical approach. Now, these two are universal. They apply to all types of skill building and learning, any subject. Then it goes a little deeper and says, for every subject, have an appropriate pedagogy that deepens understanding in that subject. So let's take examples, and these are examples from NCF. NCF talks about this. First, it says when you're teaching math, use concrete objects in the classroom for them to understand math, right? It says that when you teach science, don't get them to just observe and see. Get them to actually learn by doing. Get them to do things in the classroom, or get them to do things in the, ground. Do things in the community. That is how you learn science. For English or languages, it talks about using appropriate pedagogies to deepen the skill building and usage of that language. Now, English language is taught differently from, let's say, a Hindi language. Hindi will be taught differently in the South, which is not their native language, but let's say in the North, which is what they are using right from the beginning. So you have to use appropriate pedagogies to teach all of these different subjects. So this is the fourth thing that NCF talks about us making a change in. That one, we become very deliberate about pedagogy. We don't just focus on content and topics. We focus on how we're teaching, and then it gives us very specific clues on how should we teach. Next, NCF says that, hey educators, math, science, English, social science is not enough to be ready for life. There is a lot more that our kids need to learn to be ready for the future. And it basically says that we must introduce important life skills and go beyond the traditional subjects. Now it talks about environmental awareness, it talks about coding skills, it talks about building 21st century skills among students, it talks about vocational skills, it talks about art, it talks about sports. It says that none of these things are extra, they're not co-curricular, they're not extra, they are core. They are core to preparing these children for the future. And we must introduce them into our core curriculum. Now there are different ways of introducing it. You could integrate it with certain existing subjects. You could have separate subjects. It is really on us on how do we integrate this together, but at least let us recognize that we need to go beyond the 4 or 5 core subjects that we have been tied to now for many, many years. So this is the 5th change that NCF talks about. And the 6th one is basically making learning interdisciplinary, which is connect all of these different subjects in an interdisciplinary manner. It recognizes that life is not broken up into subjects. Life is whole. And understanding of all of these areas or all of these subjects is important for us to live life powerfully by making connections across different subjects. Now, the way to do it would be, for example, in foundational years, that means when they're very, very young, don't even break it up into subjects, keep it very integrated. Slowly break into subjects as you go from foundational years to preparatory years, which is primary, very often we call it primary, right? Or middle. Don't be in a hurry to break it up. And then as you break up into subjects, ensure that you are doing interdisciplinary activities and interdisciplinary interventions to ensure that they are connecting the dots. Otherwise, they are going to go out in the world and think, hey, but where is social science in this? How many children have we heard say when they go into college that whatever I learned in math is not relevant? Actually, everything that they've learned in math is relevant, but they just don't know what is the relevance of it. They don't know how to connect it to life. Okay, so NCF, actually the 600 pages, if you really crystallize it, these are the 6 big directional changes it asks us to make as educators. And if we make these changes, we will truly prepare our students for this changed future. And this changed future is board exams, which are basically only assessing for application and understanding. They are not assessing for memory. And these exams which mimic life, where they have to go out and they have to actually live life. Okay, now I'll just quickly recap before we move forward. 6 changes. 6 changes that we must make as educators. 1, change the way assessments are conducted in our schools, also how assessments are used. 2, move away from textbook-based teaching to multimodal teaching. 3, use the gradual release of responsibility model in your classroom. 4, use appropriate pedagogies for each of the subjects. We spoke about some examples. Use concrete objects for math, use learning by doing in science, use appropriate pedagogy in English language or any of the languages for them to really become skilled at using the language independently. Teach important life skills, so integrate this into your curriculum, whether it is 21st century skills or whether it is environmental awareness, or introduce newer subjects like coding, vocational, because NCF has said that we must do it, right? I mean, all of that is going to start becoming core. In fact, board exams and board results will start capturing assessment and performance data across all of these different things. Those shifts will happen in the next 1 or 2 years. And the last one is make learning interdisciplinary. So this is really the crux of, or I would say, some of the main things that one can extract from NCF. Now, I made a slightly different commitment to you. I said, okay, we'll learn this, but we'll also talk about how can you take this back to your schools? What can you do as educators and school leaders and bring this back to your schools? Because this can be quite a lot. So how do we make the change in our schools for us to get there, right? First, what you can do today is basically choose a strong curriculum that actually brings NCF to life. Now, it really means two things. One, don't choose a textbook as the anchor of your curriculum. Choose something which is multimodal as the anchor of your curriculum. Something that connects technology, audiovisual, activities, kinesthetic, everything along with a book to make that learning come to life. When this is not connected, when you take it from different people, it becomes very difficult for a teacher and for a student to understand what's going on. So look for something where it's a more holistic solution. And the second part of this is that, when you're choosing a book or a textbook, look for the NCF features that I've spoken about, the NCF changes, whether they are deeply embedded in a chapter. So, simple. Pick up 2 books, open the chapters, you'll be able to see, is pedagogy deeply ingrained and embedded in every chapter? Is it at the end of the chapter? Is NCF features a leaflet or a page after 3 chapters? I mean, we all know what publishers are doing, right? So I think it's important that as educators and school leaders, you are choosing what is right for your students, keeping these principles in mind. Choose something which is more holistic and multimodal, and choose something that even within the textbook actually very deeply integrates NCF. The big differentiator I'll ask you to look for is basically pedagogy. Is there a pedagogy or is it just content? Like, is it just a list of topics and subtopics, or is there some pedagogy embedded? Now, there are multiple subject pedagogies. You can decide what is right for your students. Okay, so that's the first change that you can make. The second change that you can make, and you must start making right away, is you must build teacher capability. This is a very new way of teaching, and this is a big habit shift for teachers in the classroom. We all know that changing habits is tough. It's a hard thing to do. Now, we need to work with teachers at 2 levels. One, we need to first build awareness that this needs to happen. Most teachers are not aware of what NCF is asking us, why is it saying so, and hence why should I even bother doing it? We must make them aware. I mean, come on, as teachers, they're so busy, they are not going to be able to read the 600 pages, and it's not a very easy document to read and decipher, right? It becomes our job as leaders. So build awareness around what NCF says, and then the second is build capability in them being able to execute what NCF is asking us to execute. Like, this shift from lecture-based teaching to gradual release of responsibility model is not very easy. Movement from textbook-based to multimodal requires effort. So we have to work with our teachers and build their capability for them to be able to make this shift. So this is the second thing that you must start doing right away in your schools. Third is get tools. Get technology tools that will enable you to do this. This is how technology is very powerful, right? Technology can actually make life simple for you. So get technology in your classroom. Now, what I mean by having technology in your classroom is, I know most of you have smart boards or interactive boards or TVs. Few classrooms are not enough. You must get it in every classroom. Because if you recall, what I was saying is that every teacher should be teaching in a multimodal manner. So if she has to now plan that, I have to take my kids from X classroom to Y classroom, and this device is not working, it becomes very difficult. So enable your classroom with technology and enable every classroom with technology. That's basics. The second is enable yourself with technology tools. As a leader, you must know and you must have data that tells you what's going on in my classroom, what is happening with my teachers, what is happening with my students, and hence what is the targeted intervention I can make. What is the targeted help I can provide? Walking down the corridors of a school is not the best way to know what's going on, because everyone knows what to change the moment they sense you on the corridor, right? But looking at data and looking at dashboards can give you a very good picture of what's going on, and hence you can be very diligent as a leader on what do you want to focus on in your classroom. And the third place to introduce technology is selectively technology for your students that personalizes the learning experience for them. Because ultimately classrooms are one teacher with 40 students. Even the best of the teachers who's implementing everything will not be able to reach every single child. There will be some children sometimes who are going to get left behind, or there will be children who are fast enough and need more. So personalization with technology is a third place where you must look for tools that can enable your teachers and your classrooms. Okay, so the third thing is tools that will enable all of this change. And the last one really is, it sounds like the hardest, but actually it's the simplest, is change your timetable to enable spiral learning. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is, and I'll show you an example, right? As school leaders, whatever timetable and schedule we set, the whole school actually operates on that timetable. So we are the decision makers of what time is the teacher going to spend, what is she going to spend time on, what are my children going to do, which classroom are they going to be in, and what are they going to be doing inside the classroom. That is a lot of power, and that power can be used to introduce spiral learning. Now what that means is that, you recall what is spiral learning? We said that spiral learning is basically not teach, assess, give marks and move on. We basically want to teach, assess, and then have a loop of remedial before we move forward. Right? Now what that means is, when you think of an annual calendar, what you do is, let's say you have broken your school calendar into 6 or 7 units, right? You start the first unit, learning happens in that unit, revision happens, then assessment happens. Before the unit ends, you must remediate. This is how at a unit level you're spiraling. Then the next block, which is your second unit, you will again now spiral. So after every unit, after every formative assessment, you basically have a remediation layer, right? 1 or 2 days of remediation before you move forward. The moment you do that on your school calendar, the culture will start shifting. You do that with unit 3. Now let's say you come to the mid-year, you do the same thing. You revise everything, you assess, you do your summative assessment, and then again you remediate before you move forward. Imagine our school year where the school year does not end with the final exam. And then we say goodbye to our children, right? And we send them results at home. Imagine that you have done the assessment and your school year is actually ending with remediation. That is a learning environment. That is a very powerful learning environment where your students remediate for that year and they're set up for success before they move to the next school year. And that is what we mean by spiral learning. So change your timetable to enable spiral learning. And if you connect this back to what I was sharing earlier, have tools that enable this spiral learning to happen. Like you need technology tools that will give you insights from the assessment data, that will tell you what to do in the remediation class. So these are the 4 things that you can take up immediately as school leaders for you to implement NCF in your schools. You must choose a strong curriculum that truly brings out the essence of what NCF has been asking us to do, which means it anchors learning on pedagogy, it enables learning through appropriate pedagogies, it enables the right lesson planning. So choose a strong curriculum that enables all of that. Build teacher capability, because you can give great tools and great solutions in the hands of a raw person, but if they don't know how to use it, they're not going to be able to make the best of it. So build your teacher capability. Third is equip yourself with technology and tools that enables you to make this change. And last but not the least, change your timetable to enable spiral learning. And if you do all of this, we will be able to move our kids to a much different future. So let's commit to making some of these changes so that we can prepare our students for this changed future where we're expecting them to apply all of their learning, where we don't expect them to memorize because it's not important.